I am Lee W. Miller, and Desi Capaz is right behind. We have a great show for you today. Sorry about the little technical difficulty having a previous show begin airing in advance of 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. As always, we are proud to be sponsored by Signet Reverse Mortgage, and Tom McDonald will be joining us a little bit later. But I want to tease you with some topics here because we have Randy Gularte joining us momentarily in studio, and we're going to talk about Measure C. Measure C is a very important ballot initiative that is very impactful on real estate. And so we're going to educate our listeners on Measure C with Randy here in just a few minutes. Also, we always like to talk about real estate related or realtor related events in the Valley. And boy, what a great event the Napa Valley Gala was at Chardonnay Hall this past Saturday. $100 gave us all we could eat, all we could drink, and all we could dance. And it was a really great event. Can't wait to find out how much money we raised for the fire victims. So thank you for all of the hard work by the committee that worked so hard to put that event together. And of course, there's a couple of events coming up. The Bash is Appalachian St. Helena on April 7th. I think that's one of the best values of any event in the Napa Valley because you get to taste about 35 different Cabernets of Appalachian St. Helena paired with wonderful dishes by culinary chefs from the CIA. But don't forget Cycle for Sight on April 21st as well. This year I'm actually going to ride in the event. So not the Century. I'm not going to be the hardcore road cyclist that Randy is and some of the other people. When I normally volunteer, I'm up on the hill with a flag. But this time it just feels right. As the proceeds in part go to the Pathway Home, I am going to ride my old dusty non-road bike hybrid a whopping 15 miles. I'm going to go 15 miles, and then I'll be working the booth for Vine Trail because I'm on the board there. So Desi is with us now.
Yes, I am.
He's our engineering specialist expert, and he got all of the technical stuff in order while I
thank God I did my training back in 1970, and I remember no, I'm just kidding.
Well, that's why you're so familiar with this board.
Yeah, that's it. No, everything's fine. You heard an old show of ours at the beginning, but this is live.
Absolutely. We are live, and we are Lee W. Miller and Desi Capaz, and we are realtors with Heritage Sotheby's, the premier brokerage in the Napa Valley. And we live, eat, sleep, and breathe real estate, so that's why we have this show, so that we can impart some of our expertise, our knowledge to our listeners, as well as learn from them as well. So never, ever hesitate to reach out to us. You can look at leeanddesi.com or at Lee and Desi on Twitter, or leeanddesi@gmail.com, and let us know what you think. So, are we ready to jump into topic?
Yeah.
That is Measure C. Everybody, welcome. Cue applause. Randy Gularte, welcome to the studio. And look, he's got his mouth right up next to the mic. He is a professional.
He is ready to go.
He's been here before. He understands that you can't move too far away from the mic. So.
There you go. Well, he is the broker owner of Heritage Sotheby's here in Napa, and also owner of Crown Property Management. So wealth of knowledge. He's been in the newspaper just recently. And hey, Randy, how are you doing today?
Great. Thank you very much.
And very, very connected to the community, and also all things real estate. He knows what's good for the community and what's not. And so we asked him to come shed some of his insight on Measure C. And let's just, for clarity's sake, any ballot initiative, there is a yes vote and a no vote. But from the proponents of Measure C, when you ask them what is the Watershed Oak Woodland Protection Measure C all about, straight from their website, they say It's about water. Napa's primary source of water are the watersheds, the hillsides and the higher elevation areas that feed into the Napa River. That source is at risk from climate change, from overuse, from deforestation of the watershed. The oak woodlands help direct water into the underground stores where it supplies wells and creeks. When developers cut down the woodlands, it increases erosion and decreases the supply of clean water for agriculture and home use. This measure protects the woodlands and the areas next to the rivers and creeks to preserve our water security. So that is the message for the yes on Measure C. And the real estate community has kind of put it directly, taken issue with that, and has challenged them to provide some evidence of the science behind that claim. I mean, it sounds great, and anybody reading that would, without knowing any more, would say, well, of course, I want to, that sounds great. Why would I be opposed to that?
Right.
And we're going to answer that question today. So, Randy, why don't you give a quick little overview, say perhaps a rebuttal to that yes on Measure C.
Okay, be glad to, Lee and Desi. Thank you for inviting me today.
Sure.
Just to cover Measure C is some facts. There's about 400,000 acres that are involved in this initiative. So it covers all AW, agricultural watershed zone properties. So that's your hillsides. It also includes areas that are in the flatland. So a lot of the flatland, which has vineyard, is AP zone, agriculture preserve, but this is AW. But there's a lot of flatland area that is agricultural watershed, AW, like Hagen Road area, the Old Sonoma Road, Carneros area. A lot of that is AW. So we need to understand that this is not just the hillsides. This is some flatland that is also involved in this. It does not involve the city limits properties, the incorporated areas of Calistoga, St. Helena, Yountville, American Canyon, and Napa. However, we all get to vote on this initiative. So, of course, we're going to look up onto the hills, and like Lee was saying, it's always very nice to look up on the hills and see these wonderful oak trees up there, etc. The problem with Measure C is there's a lot of undefined things that go into this initiative that has not been answered, the questions, and such as the number one thing is the October fire. Do we know how many acres was burned? We do know there was about 30,000 acres that were involved in the fire. However, we don't know how many of those acres of oaklands was actually burned and will have to be removed. And that's important in this initiative because the initiative says everything's the way it is now until there's 795 acres of burned woodlands and removed oaklands before this initiative takes effect. Well, if 30,000 acres was burned, we would assume that 795 acres of those poor oaks have to be removed. And as you can see, as you drive up Atlas Peak and Soda Canyon, there's a lot of oak trees being removed right now because of power lines, PG&E, etc., is having to remove. There's also trees that are on private property, which is being removed because they have burned and died, and yet we won't know for years how many true acres were burned in this fire because, of course, oak trees don't automatically show if they die or not because they're from the inside. And so it's going to take years. But this initiative will say, well, when there's 795 acres, how do we define that? How do we know what it is? That's one of the problems with the initiative. So now we go into the initiative itself. It states that after the 795 acres is defined, and then anything after that, you will need to get a permit to take down an oak tree. Now, what does that mean? Well, if an oak tree is sitting on your property, one more point. This applies to all properties over 1 acre. So like 1.01 acre parcel, it applies to.
Even 1 acre, right on the dot.
Right on the dot.
Right.
So therefore, if you have an acre of land that is in the AW in the county, you are being affected by this. And the question comes in that in regards to the tree on your property. Okay, so let's say, for instance, you have a tree that's on your property now and it's in halfway decent shape, but because of certain reasons, be it view, obstruction of branches onto your rooftop, or whatever, and you want to cut it down, you would have to get a permit under this initiative.
Even if your house is already built, sitting right there.
That is correct.
Okay.
Even if it's built, you have to get a permit. Well, we all know, or most of us know, that the permitting process takes time. But also on top of that, think about you have the fire victims that are pulling permits right now for houses. And then on top of that, you've got the standard construction people going out and getting permits. And now this is just going to be another layer of government.
Well, it's extra cost to the
cost
homeowner.
To the homeowner and time.
Yeah.
So you just want to take one tree down. Can you imagine if there's 5 or 6 trees and now you hire a tree company to say, can you please take these trees down for reasons people have, and they turn around and say, no, we need to get a permit. Well, it could be months before that tree could be taken down.
Right.
And then, of course, what is the cost of it? You know, to get the permit, no one has defined that. But then also the cost of government of being able to do they have to hire more people, whatever, to handle this initiative? Because it says in the report that annually there will be a report to the Board of Supervisors that states the number of acres that was removed, what was the process, what's the cost, fees, etc. that were charged, and therefore the government has to come up with how are they going to do that. They have
Right.
another bureaucracy.
Right.
So
Well, not only that, I mean, let's talk about if you're not in compliance. This could be criminal charges.
that's what it says, and it doesn't say what the charges will be. It could be misdemeanor. It could
Sure.
be a fee. One of the things they mention is that if you take a tree down without permission, that the fee could be the value of the tree. Well, as you know, that if you have an arborist go out there and look at the tree to appraise it, what is the value? And we in real estate understand that oak trees have tremendous value to a piece of property. So therefore, you could be thousands of dollars worth of fees that would be charged that you took the tree down,
Right.
you know, without permission.
And then, in addition to the fine, you would be still responsible for replanting 3 trees for that one at your expense too. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And that gets into another scenario, whereas, okay, let's say, for instance, I get a permit, and after a while I get my permit, but then I have to pay a fee, or I have to replace the one tree that I'm taking down for 3. Well, I have to put them on my property. Well, wait a minute. I'm on an acre of land, and I don't have room to put.
Yeah, there's
3 more
nowhere to
trees.
put it.
That's right.
Exactly.
So then you have to go find your neighbor to ask them if they could put it. You could put it on there, and they may say no. Then you have to find a place close by, and what happens if you can't find anything? Well, then they're saying that you'll have to pay a fee. So the fee will supposedly go into the Wild Oak Habitat Initiative in order to more awareness to everyone about the protection of trees. Well, no one says what that fee is going to be. Is it the value of the tree, which could be thousands of dollars per if you can't replace it? So that's just one more question mark in this initiative that is not defined.
Right.
I think the biggest gotcha, aha, scary thing that I saw about this was for all of those people who have an acre or more that they have not yet built on, and they are plan to build at some particular point.
Sure.
And they bought that land based on the current setback requirements that are already, mind you, the most strict in the entire state of California. Our county restrictions for preserving trees and whatnot, it's the most strict. But they own that land. They now want to build that house. There could very well be, with hundreds and hundreds of examples of this, the fact being there's no longer a place to build anywhere on that lot because the setbacks have now increased to a certain point. Well, okay, then we'll move the house over here. Oh, nope, that's too close to that tree. Oh, then we'll move it this way. Oh,
Right.
that's too close to the creek. And all of those setbacks now make that
Land-
2-acre, 3-acre parcel
Not valuable
even
anymore.
a 10-acre parcel if the trees are positioned in such a way that there's no place you can build your house.
Yeah.
You now have $1 million piece of property that just went to zero value.
Exactly.
Because you can't do
And there's an
anything with it.
incident that could very well be the case with a real estate agent in town that dealt with a transaction in that sense. Bought the parcel, and they don't. And this could affect them in the future.
Right.
And she's very concerned. So, let's call it for what it is, right, Randy? I mean, this is restricting property rights, is it not?
It is, and the issue comes in as Lee and Desi was mentioning. Think about I like to feel like for the little guy. I mean, the little guy is somebody who just went out there, husband and wife bought a piece of property, even a vacant parcel of 1 acre or more, or maybe a home of like 1,200 square feet, and as their family grows, they need to add on to it. But because of this initiative, they talk about replacement of oak trees if you cut one down. They also talk about the tree canopy. So in other words, you can't build under the canopy of a tree. Well, what's the extension of that canopy? So if you start looking at all that, now you may have, if you look at Dry Creek Road, along Dry Creek, there's tons of oak trees along there. Hagen Road and the Hagen Creek, there's a ton of oak trees. And if you just drive by and take a look, and if those houses were not there now,
There would never be any
they'd
houses.
never be able to
Yeah.
build.
Right.
And is that the right thing to do? Are we now anti-growth, so even person can't even buy a 1 acre parcel in the county of Napa and want to build their dream home? I mean, that's what the American dream is all about,
Yeah.
being able
Right.
to do that.
Right.
And so we have to look at this and say, is this the right thing for Napa? We are very, very
Go ahead.
we are very stringent already on our growth, and also about scenic easements, etc., and on the hillside. So to turn around and do this just makes it more difficult.
So let's talk about the watershed portion and the setbacks for the edge of creeks and
Sure.
and rivers. Right now, is it right now, or is it in Measure C that is it 100 feet setback from the top of the bank?
Okay, so under the initiative, it talks about Class 1, Class 2, Class 3 streams. Well, checking with the county, checking with Fish and Game, checking with all the powers to be, there is no definition
Yeah.
of what a Class 1, Class 2, and
Very
3
hard to
stream is.
define.
The initiative defines it.
Yeah.
But to turn around and say, is that what's going to be acceptable to Fish and Game, etc.,
Right.
we don't know. We all assume the Napa River is a Class 1 stream, okay, because it has fish in it. However, how far up the Napa River is it defined? Is it going to Yountville, or is it further up? And so therefore, that setback is defined in the initiative is 125 feet from a Class 1 stream.
125 feet.
From the top of bank.
Right.
And the top of bank is very, very difficult to determine without an engineer going out there doing a
Exactly.
study to determine the top of
And
bank.
folks, it's not at the edge of the water. The top of the bank could be literally up a ravine.
That could be 125
5
feet from
feet
the water.
from the water, which then you add another 125
Yes.
feet.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So the example that I like to use is you think of your 1 acre parcel and 209 feet by 209 feet is your typical 1 acre. So if you took 125 feet, let's say that 209-foot parcel had a Class 1 stream along it, and you took 125 feet from the top of bank, you're looking at 80 feet left in order to build a house. Now you have setbacks, you have maybe oak trees that are in the canopy of that 85 feet.
Right.
So all of a sudden now you basically make that property, as Lee has mentioned, unbuildable. So the only value would be for someone to do a lot line, buy it and do a lot line adjustment, and never be able to create another house there. And so the value diminishes considerably with this initiative on a lot of the properties that I see anyway. And that's one of my major concerns about this, because it hurts the little guy. The the wealthy individual, and I don't want to get into the vineyard part of this because
Sure.
that's not my
It's
game.
a whole different thing. Yeah.
Yes, but I like to talk about the little guy that says, look at, we bought this property, we want to add on, our family has grown, or we want to build a house on it, but we can't because this initiative now has completely shot our dreams completely. So
Yeah.
it's just not right.
Right.
So
Well, what really kills me, and this is a vague comment, and I'm not going to try, but our liberties are taken away. It just seems like daily here, and this is just one of the things that we got to consider being. A property owner is one of the things that you said is an American dream that we need to value, and I think this is just more government restriction. And what is it going to do? Is it really going to save that extra oak tree or that extra? That's what I want to talk to the proponents about. What are we trying to do here? Because as it is, we have restrictive laws with saving the oaks. What is an extra tree going to do? I don't understand.
right, and we can talk about replanting if there's a concern that people have that saying, well, we're losing oak trees at a rapid rate and we should have replanting. Well, it's the same thing as when vineyards are being submitted for an erosion control plan. They have a replanting, a mitigation on how we're going to replant some of those trees. So that's a way to be able to look at this and say, is there a way to handle the replanting of trees in order to say that we're not losing as trees as we had before. But I think it's important to understand that when we are told by this initiative what we can or cannot do, and the question comes in, there's so many questions about this initiative that are unanswered, it's going to have to go through the court system to determine what is the correct and what is not correct. And as I mentioned, the class 1, 2, and 3 streams is the perfect example because no one has a definition of them.
And that sounds to me as if this is Measure C does go through, then we can foresee a lot of lawsuits.
Everyone talks about that on every initiative, and so not to get into the legality
Sure.
of this thing because we can have all day long talking about that, but I think it's important to understand that. The questions are the 795 acres. No one knows how many acres were burned. So therefore, does this initiative take effect the day it passes? Well, if we know, and I'm sorry to say this, but think about the people that are out there with their houses, and I live in an AW zone on Hagen Road, and I have oak trees, and right now I'm looking at those going, if I find out this initiative passes and now I'm past 795 acres and I have to plant 3 to 1, well, am I just going to go out there with a chainsaw and risk that my neighbors don't tattletale on me?
Right.
And now all of a sudden, now you got neighbors versus neighbors calling up the county code enforcement saying he's cutting down a tree and I don't like it, and now they have to go out, and the guy says, but wait a minute, I got a permit. See, here's my permit. So now everyone's wasting time,
Right.
and neighbors start hating neighbors because a tree's being cut down.
Right.
And it just seems like it just goes too far.
It does.
It
does. Well, and I guess my question is more specifically was there any science done behind all this? Was there anything? Do we have some reports being facilitated right now that we're able to look at and say, oh yes, cutting down that extra oaks or planting that extra oak will help the environment
in X or Y
Sure.
or whatever.
Right.
I just haven't seen any of those reports going around.
Right.
Have you? I don't know. Have you
How
guys?
they come up with 795?
Right.
Well, and
These
let's talk about the 795. So that's kind of a point of confusion for a lot of people. It states that after 795 acres of trees have been removed, then the additional mitigation factors kick in. Is that right?
Yes.
So from some demarcation point, which we don't know is going to be the day after the election or next January 1, or we don't know when that is, but because the initiative doesn't state that.
Correct.
But assuming that we did know the demarcation date, from that mysterious date to some random time when somebody theoretically has been tracking 795 acres, even 795 acres, if one tree is cut down on a 3-acre parcel, is that 3 of the 795, or is that
It
how,
doesn't
how is it
define
going to
that.
be calculated?
It doesn't define that. So you think the obvious thing would be is if you clear cut 795 acres, but wait a minute, along Atlas Peak Road and Soda Canyon, the PG&E is cutting down trees, and it states in here many times is the tree. It doesn't say what kind of tree. So one of my other questions is, what about non-oak species trees like eucalyptus, etc.? If you cut those down, does that count toward this? It's not really clear to me anyway. And again, this is all my personal opinion on this stuff, okay? But I think the problem is that how are we going to define an acre of land that was removed for woodlands? Is it clear cut, or like you're saying, is you take an average of X amount of trees per acre and say, well, every time there's X amount of, if there's 3 trees on this lot and 5 on this, and a total of 20, and that means that's an acre, and therefore, well, PG&E's cutting down a whole bunch of acres right now.
Right.
And the problem's going to be is who the government county has to go out there and define it,
Right.
clarify it. And there's no way they can do that.
Oh, come on,
You know?
Randy.
Right.
There's people at the county that have so much time on their hands, they can totally add this to the list.
Right. So, yeah, they're going to go out there and every acre they're going to count and say, okay, well, this fire burned this. I mean, just like the Star and Regalia 911 report to the county pointed out, the total acres in the perimeter was almost 70,000 acres, but the acres of oak woodlands within fire perimeter was 30,000. Okay, so you'd think that's 2.5% would be 795 acres. So therefore, you would assume that 795 acres were burned in the fire.
Right.
But until we know truly did that they burn and have to be removed,
Yeah.
will this initiative just sit there and wait?
There's a lot of unanswered questions, really.
Is that where they came up with the 795? Is they think that 795 was already?
No, see, remember this initiative was signed, sealed,
Before
and
the
delivered
fires.
before the fire.
Before the
Okay,
fire.
yeah.
so-
And that's one of the things is why didn't they put in there saying that fires are not included? Why didn't they put in there da 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 da? What they did was basically they are upset with the process that we have for putting in, and I hate to say this because I don't want to really get into it, like the vineyards, the vineyard development up on Atlas Peak, the Hall Vineyard. I mean, that's a lot of acres that is going to be taken out and put into vineyard production, and so they're looking at that going, okay, well that's boom. That could be the whole 795 acres right there. It says as of September 1st, 2017. Well, does that mean this is included or is it not, this hall development? And then there's another one on Dry Creek that could be along the same lines. And so it's very, very confusing for the average person. But I will say that the key to this is you're going to see a lot of yes and a lot of no signs, and you're going to see most of them in the county. But it's basically the city limit people that are going to be the determining factor on this.
Because that's where the population
and all they're
is.
going to look at is up on the hills and see the oak trees and say, we don't want to lose any.
Yeah, we're going to feel good about saving oak trees.
Right.
So
Well, and that's why I want to come back in the next break and talk a little bit about like the proponents that are saying save the trees, save the water, and we need to, it's just not all about that. It's about property rights, and that's why we're here talking about it today. We're real estate agents concerned about our property rights.
stay tuned. Welcome back to the Lee and Desi Real Estate Show. I'm Lee W. Miller.
And I'm Desi Capaz.
We have had quite the interesting discussion thus far on Measure C, and we're going to be right back with Randy talking about that some more. But of course, it is time for This Day in History. And Desi, let me ask you a question. Would you pay $136 to have a half an ounce Oh, I shouldn't have paused there.
Wow.
Half an ounce of
Well, yeah.
papers delivered 1,800 miles away, taking 10 days.
Wow, that's
Let me help you.
profound.
The answer is an astounding and obvious no, you would not do that.
No.
But that was the average cost and the delivery at one point in time. And the
Okay.
fastest time ever was just 8 days, but special circumstances were involved because on this day in history, the brainchild, I'm going to tell you the year in just a minute, a brainchild of a couple of freight business owners set up over 150 relay stations along a pioneer trail across the present-day states of Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, and Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and California. Of course, I am referring to the Pony Express, and the year was 1860, and that $136 is today's dollars, but it was actually $5 then. Still a pretty hefty fee.
Isn't that crazy? Isn't that funny that like back then, like $1 was like huge money. Like
Yeah.
you just you got what? How much? $2-3 in your
Yeah.
wallet? Yeah, son. But yeah, that's what it was.
That average of 10 days was reduced to 8 days for those special circumstances, the delivery of Lincoln's inaugural address. And the business owners who started the Pony Express had hoped to gain monumental a contract with the U.S. government, but of course that never happened because just as today, sometimes new technology rises to squelch entire industries, and 18 months after the Pony Express began, the first transcontinental telegraph was launched, and that was the end of the Pony Express 18 months after it began. And yet we still all learned about it in elementary school, and those iconic posters of the Pony Express rider galloping across the Old West still live strongly in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And just out of curiosity, I researched the 3 businessmen that started the Pony Express. All of them were quite successful before they started Pony
Okay.
Express.
Okay.
All of them never saw any success thereafter, and they all 3 died penniless.
That's a shame.
Yeah. But
Well,
just-
maybe they just I don't know. They didn't use their lawyers correctly or something. I
right.
don't know.
They didn't have a business plan.
And have a business plan. There you go. The famous yeah.
No, it's just kind of circumstance. You know,
Right.
who knew 18 months before that the telegraph was going to
Right.
do
Kinda
away with the Pony
negate,
Express? So.
Yeah, negate. Yeah, well, it's kind of almost like now how technology moves pretty quickly. So like one comes out and
Yeah.
just a few months, almost a few months later,
Brick
there's
and mortar
something that's-
retail is
right.
kind of going away.
Yeah, that too. Well, it's taken some time, but it finally, the
Yeah.
internet's taken it down. So
Yeah. All right. Well, that is your This Day in History and a quick real estate trivia. Actually, I have 2 because I'm being selfish. In New York City, the Central Park in New York City covers 843 acres, and the estimated value of Central Park from a pure real estate perspective. You want to venture a guess? Don't even go there. Higher. The guess is, did you guess 512 trillion,
Holy moly.
626 billion? If you did, that was too high. It's 512 billion, 626 million and change. That's a lot of real estate.
That is a lot of real estate.
Yeah. And the last
Interesting.
quick
Interesting.
real estate trivia, the federal government owns 50% of the land in the western U.S., and yet less than 5% of the land in the eastern half.
Well, I mean, that's, yeah.
Because, yeah.
Right. We colonized that side and
yeah.
trampled all over the land. And
Yeah. So I just thought that the disparity.
But, it's so funny because we've been a nation for how long?
240 years.
Okay, there you go. Because I knew you knew the answer. So it's going to take some time, but the population boom is happening and is occurring, and there's more people in this world than ever before, and it will continue this way. And so the West will eventually just fill out. I mean, we're expanding and expanding and expanding, but we're in our lifetime, we're still seeing it expand. I mean, we're just
sure.
the West, the stories of like the frontier. Well, it's still we're still expanding, you know.
I'm a little older than you, but I remember population elementary school era for me was 3.8 billion people,
Yeah.
and now it's like 7.8. So,
yeah, and they're all in China.
yeah. At least a billion or so.
Yeah.
It's time to welcome Tom McDonald, Signet Reverse Mortgage. Tom, welcome to the show.
Well, good morning again, Lee.
Hey, Tom.
Hi, Desi.
Hello.
What
right.
pearls of wisdom do you have for us today, Tom?
Well, something we've never talked about at all on this show, and it's time to talk about it. I thought
I feel like I'm being sat down to get a serious lecture.
well, things happen when you aren't careful. It's kind of
Okay,
where
so
it's
this
at.
is a courtesy warning from Tom McDonald.
Yeah, there you go. I find that when I do a reverse mortgage, probably 2/3 of the time, the borrower is holding title in a fairly simple way: individual, joint ownership, that sort of a thing, and that's obviously no problem. There are issues, though, with other forms of ownership that we just have to be careful about. So the point is, if you don't hold title in a simple way, joint ownership, individual ownership, make sure you let the loan officer know so that they can look into it a little bit. So, for instance, if one of the owners is under the age of 62 on joint ownership, that could be a problem. It used to be that when a spouse was under 62, we just plain couldn't do a reverse mortgage with the spouse on title. We can do that now, so that's not the same issue it was before, but we need to know about that up front, because when you do the counseling, it's going to change how that is filled out. A trust, fairly typical form of owning a home nowadays. But again, make sure your loan officer knows this, because both the lender and the title company are going to have to approve that trust. 95+% of trusts are going to qualify. There's not going to be an issue. It used to be that an irrevocable trust would not qualify, but we've been able to get some of those approved now. It's not a slam dunk, but some of those can be approved also. Another form of ownership that we see occasionally is a life estate. A life estate might be the case where maybe a man or a woman owned a home. If they were an individual owner and they got married, and now the original owner passes away. Well, he wanted to take care of his children. He wanted the house to go to his children, but he didn't want to toss his spouse out in the wild out there without a home, so she is allowed to stay in the home for the rest of her life based on the way he wrote his will and or trust. And now she's in there as a beneficiary of a life estate. Conceivably, she can get a reverse mortgage if the beneficiary is approved, the beneficiaries being his children. So if the children approve of her getting a reverse mortgage, that would be okay. But they do have to approve, because
Sure,
their
it's a
equity
trust.
is going to be used up in part because of the reverse mortgage. So they may or may
Sure,
not approve
they have a
it.
decision, yeah.
Right. It's just kind of up to that. And so there has to be some discussions when
Yeah.
we have property that isn't just vanilla, I call it.
Sure.
There's all types of different ways of holding title. And it's hard to go into all that. Matter of fact, when you buy a house, the
Oh, yeah.
title company will give you a big, long list. How are you going to hold title?
Right.
And, of course, they can't give advice. And so you're going to look at that and say, gosh, I didn't even know there were so many ways of holding title.
Right.
So, again, if you know that you have title held somewhat other than a vanilla format, make sure your loan officer knows. He may not know the answer, no matter how experienced he is. So he may go to his lender ahead of time just to make sure that there's not an issue going on, so that you don't go into application on something that's not going to work.
Right.
Maybe you could make it work by removing somebody or having an attorney change things around for you to a way that's acceptable to the lender and to yourselves.
Well, trusts are always a huge in real estate. I mean,
Sure.
anytime we have clients, and anytime we're selling property, we make sure that that's out there. There's it's a trust sale, and what's going to happen is there's more than one person involved. So it happens in reverse mortgages, it seems like.
Right. Well,
Right,
even
because
regular
these
mortgages
people, yeah, because
have the same issues.
yeah, but there are other people on the other end wanting to take equity too.
Right.
And they may not want that equity to take. So it's an interesting subject and something to look for.
I thought it was worth talking about.
Yeah, and it sounds like the reverse mortgage industry has taken steps of late to add some flexibility and options for the homeowners as opposed to those strict guidelines that used to be in place. For example, the spouse who's not yet 62, but one spouse that is, and you couldn't even do it.
Correct.
Before,
We
but
even have a term now called non-borrowing spouse to handle that and allow them to remain in the home after the owner / borrower passes away. And before that was not the case. It was a big issue.
Great. Well, thank you again, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
That is Tom McDonald from Signet Reverse Mortgage. You can always reach Tom at 707-265-6385 or shoot him an email at tom@reversemortgageconsultant.com. He is the Napa Valley expert on reverse mortgages.
Thanks for the kind words, Lee.
Sure.
Bye-bye now. All right. Well, we have Randy Gularte coming back again and speaking about Measure C, which is going to be on the June ballot, and everyone in the county, especially in Napa, are going to be able to vote on this measure. And we're we're real estate agents that, we are for property rights, and that's why we're trying to shed some light on this measure and making sure people understand what they're voting for. It's just let's call it for what it is. It's we want to look. We all in this room want to save oaks. We want to save the water. We want to make sure the water is clean and a good environment for our future and for our kids and children. But also too is that we live in America. And we have property rights, and when we own a property, being an owner, you want to have somewhat not government restrictions on what you can and cannot do. So, Randy is here to talk about that. I'm sorry,
as we talked about previously, this is for acreage only in the county, and yet the entire county population, most of which lives within the city limits of the 4 or 5 primary cities in the county, are going to be the ones really deciding on it because that's where the population base is. So, Randy, over the break, did you have some thoughts on a couple other points that you wanted to specifically address that we haven't, or would you like us to fire questions at you?
Well, just a couple comments. It talks about the class 1, 2, and 3 streams, but it also talks about wetlands. And when we think about wetlands, we always think the marshlands in the South Bay area. And it says 150 feet from wetlands. Well, wetlands can be also defined as a little pond in your backyard that slowly dries up and is still mushy during the summertime, and that could be defined as a wetland. And so you'd have to be 150 feet from that little pond area, which means now you're... So think about, again, the little guy looking to buy a piece of property in Napa. He turns around and finds the property. But, however, before he buys it, he has to do a tremendous amount of research to determine that setbacks on the top of bank, which no one knows what that is. Determine if it's a class 1, 2, or 3 stream that he's next to. Determine the oak trees and possibly non-oak species trees that are on the property and their canopies, and he has to be away from them. And then he finds this little soft area that could be a wetland, so he has to get Fish and Game out there or somebody to determine if it's a wetland. So it could be months before he can finally close escrow on the property. Think of the opposite is the poor seller who wants to try to sell this little 1-acre parcel because they inherited it or whatever from their parents, and now they want to sell it because they can't afford to build on it, and now they have to go through the same process because as realtors, we want to be able to disclose as much information as we can, and by handing this initiative to a client and saying, oh, by the way, this initiative passed, but it's not clarified and defined on what the whole problems could be. Therefore, we recommend that you go check with your attorney, go check with your engineer, go check with your architect, and spend thousands of dollars and tons of time and in order to find out what you can or cannot possibly build on the property you inherited or own. So I think that's a rare problem because there's just, again, so many questions to be addressed here.
Well, let me jump in with saying this, and I know we're not insurance experts, but let's throw that aspect into the fire, right? Or lack of a better term, but you're going out to getting insurance on your property, and they say, well, this is a fire area, highly due to fires. Well, you got to remove some foliage or some trees around your area, around the house or around the structure, right? I mean, that can be said and done, right? Well, now you're under this initiative. You can't do. So how does that play a role
that's
into
just
the whole thing?
I mean, it says, let's say when defensible space is 150 feet around your house. But the insurance company comes around and says, no, we want 200 feet in order to give you insurance. But you go, well, wait a minute. That means I have to clear off, 15, 20 trees. And what's the cost of the value of those trees? Well, my insurance now has gone through the roof because of this.
Right.
So insurance is something we don't control.
Yeah.
And the insurance company says, either you want insurance or do you not? And therefore, we're going to require it. And, of course, lenders require insurance to protect their loan.
Sure.
So this could be a real mess for lenders and insurance companies. The other thing is I hate to use the word taking of property, but I think that there's a real problem here in the sense that what happens if this initiative passes and now there's parcels out there that were buildable before, and now all of a sudden they're not buildable because of all these requirements, which could take years to define what it is.
Right.
But all of a sudden now your property's not buildable, and is that a taking of land, and who's going to pay for that?
Well, that's what I was saying. So I can see, like, if this were to pass, that then these property owners would go ahead and get their lawyers, and we're looking at possible lawsuits against the city, maybe, or the county. The county. I'm sorry, not the city, the county.
That's correct.
So all at once, if this passes, this is what's going to possibly be in the future for the next few months to a years to try to stifle, to try to get through all this.
Right.
So that's what concerns me, and I think that's what right now the proponents are out there. Again, it's easy to sit here and say save trees, save clean water for the future and everything else, but that's playing on the minds of people that do not know what's in this measure, and they're going to the ballots and they're going to say, no, I want to say that we need clean water and everything. Yes, and it's just not right. They need to know. The listeners now, we just need to know. You just need to know what's in this measure. That's all I'm saying. Before you consider going to the ballot and voting yes.
And it seems obvious to us, but maybe there's listeners out there that are perceiving our position as we don't care about the environment. And that's not the case at all. Just because you're a no on Measure C doesn't mean that you don't care about clean water, doesn't care about you don't care about the view shed, things of that nature. We love the valley that we live in, and we want to preserve it, but not at a cost that is so harmful to property owners and violates property rights. And I think it's also worth pointing out that this is not Lee, Desi, and Randy that are opposed to this. Randy and Desi sit on the LGRC, and that's something I think
Local
you guys
Government Relations Committee
for the real estate industry. And so the real estate industry has locally has done a tremendous amount of research, and they did not come to this decision purely out of selfish motivation for the real estate community. This is just a bad initiative, and
Well, in our mission statement as a association, we are here to protect property rights and property owners, and this is one that we see as threatening the property rights of individuals in the county, in the city. Well, not in the city, but in the county. So thank you for clarifying that, because that is something that everyone should know, and we are opposed to it as an association. There's just too many loose. I think it's loosely written, right? Randy,
too many unknowns.
Too many unknowns. And to go ahead and say yes, this is something that we need or should have. And what other thing concerns me is that it feels like the agenda of a majority of people are going to dictate the minority of the people, and that shouldn't be the way this country's not built on that. We are a representative type of democracy, and we need to not just enforce the majority's opinion onto others. That's why we have freedom of speech, and that's why we're on this radio show right now to tell you what's in this measure, and what we feel is infringing on the property owner's rights.
Right. Correct.
You're listening to the Lee and Desi Real Estate Show, and you can reach us at leeanddesi@gmail.com. We would welcome your input on this or any other program that we do. What else, Randy? We've got a few minutes left.
Just want to add, think about driveways going up to houses in the county. Okay, so the ordinance says that if it's more than 22 feet wide, you have to, any clearing of oak trees applies to this. So if you need to go up to your property, and you may have a house already up there, but because of the fire, you need to widen it for insurance purposes because of county fire truck requirements. And now you have to be more than 22 feet wide because you may have to have turnouts or whatever. Guess what? Now you're hit with this ordinance also. So therefore, just again, I believe what's going to happen is you're going to see the little guy walking away from his properties that he's always dreamed about buying or wanting to buy, and it's going to be, and I hate to use the word wealthy, but the wealthy ones that are going to be able to afford this are going to be able to say, hey, great, I'll buy this piece of property, and it may take me 5 years in order to get it through the regulations in order to build a house on it, but I can afford to do that. Where the little guy is sitting there going, I can't afford these massive amounts of money to research just to determine if I can even build on this piece of property. So I think there's issues here that we have over the years. We've increased our designated splitting of properties in the county, and it started off at 1 acre splits, then it went to 5 acres, then it went to 20 acres, and then it went to 40 acres, and now it's the 160 acre splits. So you can't split a property under 160 acres. So therefore, you already have created one building site for 160 acres in the AW zone.
Wow.
So just think about that. This person owns this 160 acres, and he inherited it from his parents, and yet he may not be able to build on it because this ordinance is just completely collapsing any opportunity to be able to build, even on 160 acres, because the oak trees and the setbacks and the streams and everything. There's properties on Dry Creek Road that the creek runs right through the middle of their property, and it splits it. And if you go 125 feet on both sides,
you're in somebody else's property or the road.
Yeah. There's no way they can build on it.
Right.
So it's just, it's a shame that this has happened.
Right.
You know, and I think as realtors, having to list properties that may be, this initiative may cause those properties to be less desirable or less being able to be built upon, could cause a major problem between now and June 5th when this vote is. But on top of that is if it passes, then how much longer before you're going to know if you can build on that property or not because of the question marks on this initiative. Is 795 acres burned? That's the first trigger. If it hasn't been, okay. Then on top of that, you got it automatically starts with the class 1, 2, and 3 streams setbacks, but since they're not defined, we have to ask the county to go define them.
Right.
Which are which. It says in the initiative what the definition is, but no one's gone out there and said, oh, well, Pewter Creek is a class 2, da-da-da-da-da. No one's defined that. And so that all has to be done. And the county is going to say, well, we don't have the manpower for this. So we're going to have to hire more people, or we're going to have to just slowly work our way through this, and this will take years. So,
well, that sounds expensive for the property owner.
Yes.
That's all it sounds to me. So again, let's. Well, we're running out of time. We got about 3 minutes, but
well, you talking about the driveways. I just closed a $900,000 60-acre parcel in October for clients. They have to do 1.5 miles of a driveway, which is on a fire road right now, but obviously it's not legal and they have to widen it.
right.
I can't even imagine. They're already going to spend $350,000 just to put in their driveway. It might have just doubled.
That's right.
Or it may no longer be feasible, and they're out $900,000.
Right.
and they don't have a helicopter. And if they did, they still couldn't.
That's for another story.
That's another story. I was just going to say that's another story. Yeah.
We touched on that one when John Tudor was in. But
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's not,
Yeah.
that's another show.
Yeah.
But okay, well, Randy, thank you very much
You're
for coming
welcome.
in.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
And again, this was my opinion, nobody else's.
Sure.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The realtors have taken a position that they're opposing
Right.
Measure C.
Yeah, and rightly so. You heard it here. But many of the listeners, I'm sure, were either for or against, and we took a position again of the opposing side. But to be fair, and you mentioned it before the show, Lee, that and you actually you read what a lot of the initiative, the proponents wrote, right at the very top.
Yeah.
And so just to give you somewhat of a heads up, but again, this is all about property rights and something that we take to heart as a realtor. So I hope you took something out of this show.
Yeah.
I know I did.
If you still have questions, leeanddesi@gmail.com. Don't hesitate. We are passionate about this. We don't know everything about it, but what we don't know, we will get you the answers, and we will get you facts. We will not get you emotional opinion. We will not get you speculation. You can do that on your own. There's plenty of sources for that, but we're here to make sure that you know the true facts about this particular measure.
Absolutely. Well, you can catch us again next Monday at 11 a.m. on 1440 a.m. Kavon. We will have next week. We have, I think, something with the Napa Silverados, right?
Just a little snippet, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I can't wait for baseball season's already started, but
Yeah.
baseball in Napa,
Yeah.
can't
Real
get any
estate,
better
baby.
than that.
You got the infield, you got the outfield, you got home.
We can tell you how to move.
Yeah. Have a good week, everybody.